Emotion, force, popularity, culture. These are powerful concepts that invigorate ourselves and enable us to act with a lot of emotion and energy in this world. And they compel us for a lot of different reasons, but they often can compel us to act against logic and reason. Hi, my name is Brian Apavu. I am a neurologist with an interest in philosophy, the mind, and living the examined life. Today, I want to talk about logical fallacies, and this time talk about those fallacies that are appeals that override logic and reason. The first logical fallacy to discuss here is the appeal to authority. The appeal to authority fallacy occurs when someone argues that a claim must be true because authorities or experts say so without considering evidence or logical reasoning. While expertise is valuable, this fallacy arises when the authority or authority group is used in substitution for an actual argument. An example of this that we can think about is the United States Department of Agriculture's recommendations several decades ago on the food pyramid. The food pyramid was designed to give advice from an authority entity, the USDA, on what type of food is best to eat for optimal health for Americans. If we looked at the food pyramid, there was a very, very heavy emphasis of a large consumption of carbohydrates. When you talk to journalists and individuals who have looked at the history of the USDA and what came about in terms of the formulation of the original food pyramid, there was a lot of business interests that came into mind. There was a lot of business pressure to advocate for the advice toward food that was inexpensive, portable, non-perishable, and highly palatable. And as a result, we had the original food pyramid, which had recommended a large amount of carbohydrates. In the decades that preceded the advent of the original food pyramid, there was a sharp rise in the rates of obesity and metabolic disease. And there was probably a consequence of this that was at least partially related to what we had in our food pyramid. And a lot of recommendations were changed over time to go against such a large amount of refined carbohydrates. This is an example of when the appeal to authority can go wrong. A more modern example of this is social media censorship. There's been, over the last several years, a rise in fact-checking that occurs both in mainstream media as well as on social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, now known as X. This fact-checking does lead to some censorship of certain information, but underlying this at a philosophical level is what is the justification for who the fact-checkers are? How do you ensure that fact-checkers are not inherently having their own biases toward certain individuals or groups? This is an issue in terms of fact-checking misinformation. Ultimately, logic and reason need to be our tools by which we are able to understand what is truth and what is correct. The next appeal to discuss is the appeal to force. The appeal to force fallacy occurs when someone tries to win an argument by using coercion, threats, or law instead of reasoning. Law is fundamentally an attempt to legitimize the initiation of the use of force upon another to get a desired outcome. The appeal to force presented itself very robustly during the COVID-19 pandemic. At that time, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration of the United States had put forth and created mandates for employees to receive vaccinations. This created an environment for a lot of emotion and a lot of discourse that really became very present in society. The appeal to authority presented itself with a lot of panels and experts' consensus coming from the CDC as well as medical groups putting forth recommendations regarding vaccinations as well as masks. And the reality of the situation, however, was that COVID-19 was a new disease process. We didn't know very much about it. The information that we were obtaining was evolving and changing with respect to time. And this created a scenario where there was a desire for an appeal to authority. Authorities wanted to utilize the appeal to authority, But we also needed to be tempered by the fact that we really didn't understand this condition. And so many recommendations that were made may be flawed without better evidence. And there were questions as to whether authorities would improve or adjust their recommendations based upon new information, or whether they would be subject to their own self-interest, to the biases of their own self-interest. The other fundamental issue with relation to the pandemic, as well as the appeal to force, is the issue of force itself. Even if vaccinations or masking can reduce the transmission of COVID-19, does that justify the use of force to terminate an employee's agreed-upon contract with their employer? Smoking has clearly been linked to lung cancer. Does that justify the use of force to threaten criminal incrimination if one intends to purchase tobacco without paying a tax? As a physician, I can take my medical knowledge and my expertise to provide advice to my patients to try my best to help them optimize their health. But is it right for me to use my expertise to use the political arm of the government to force certain health outcomes on patients against their own sovereignty? This is where we risk going beyond the nonviolent method of using logic and reason to compel other individuals in our society to follow the advice that we think is best. And here we risk utilizing the political arm of the government and law to initiate force upon others who are nonviolent. The next logical fallacy to address is the appeal to bandwagon. The appeal to bandwagon fallacy puts forth that something must be valid if a large number of people do it. We see the appeal to bandwagon very commonly in every 4 years when we are dealing with the United States presidential election cycles, and this happens across the world as well in presidential election cycles. What happens is you end up with two major candidates. There's a large part of the population that does not like either candidate, and they either don't want to vote or they want to vote in another individual who is not one of those two. This creates a problem for the political parties that are trying to put forward those two candidates, and because they don't want a bunch of votes of people who sort of like them to go to someone else and then they lose the election. And so they really appeal to to some form of appeal to bandwagon where they want the political base or the fan group or their support group to be united as one. And oftentimes at work, we often are asked to be united as one or stronger together if a department or a group of people are trying to put something forward. This often happens in unions as well. A good example of this happened during the 2016 presidential election in the United States, when there was a Democratic primary election occurring with two leading candidates, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders was becoming very popular at the time with a lot of young Democratic and liberal individuals, and they were pretty energized by his campaign, and a lot of people looked at Hillary Clinton as being part of the system. It was clear at the time from the Democratic National Committee that their leadership wanted Hillary Clinton to win despite the popular movement that was going toward Bernie Sanders. WikiLeaks at the time had released emails just before the Democratic National Convention that confirmed that the Democratic National Committee leadership favored Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. The Democratic National Committee CFO, Brad Marshall, was identified for trying to find ways to have people ask Bernie Sanders questions that could make him look bad. Donna Brazile, a CNN contributor at the time, had actually leaked debate questions to Hillary Clinton's team just before she had a debate with Bernie Sanders. The WikiLeaks release came out just before the 2016 Democratic National Convention, and the media and a lot of the Democratic National Committee's leadership put forth the information as election interference. This concept of election interference is its own logical fallacy, which I've addressed in a different video, known as genetic fallacy. The concern here was that this was the result of Russian election interference, trying to provide information that was going to disrupt the election. The fallacy here is that the information was accurate and pertinent to voters. Even though there may be some interference from a foreign entity trying to interfere with the elections, the information is the information. You can't unsee the truth when you get that information, and you have to take it into account. If you're discrediting it, even though it's accurate and pertinent to your decision making, you're going to be falling for the genetic fallacy, logical fallacy. During the actual Democratic National Convention that year in 2016, there was a lot of energy and support toward Bernie Sanders. There were a lot of passionate people there still advocating for him, even though Hillary Clinton was being put forward as the primary nominee. And it led to some embarrassing situations where celebrities were even shaming some of the supporters in during the convention, and it just led to some really bad situations. An example of this came about when Sarah Silverman went up on stage.
Hillary. Unity. Hillary.
The Bernie, can I just say, to the Bernie or bust people, you're being ridiculous.
And so this is an example of the appeal to bandwagon, and in certain situations, it really doesn't go well. The next logical fallacy to discuss is the appeal to consequences. This fallacy puts forth that something must be true or false based upon whether the outcome is desirable or undesirable. A really good example of the appeals to consequences is Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager surrounds the issue of whether to accept that God exists or doesn't exist, using a consequence of what occurs in the afterlife. In the 17th century, Blaise Pascal had stated that believing in God is in your best interest, as it provides your best odds for the outcome of an afterlife in heaven. Fundamentally, this fallacy does not address the logic or reason as to whether God exists or does not exist. It only deals with the consequence of which decision or which belief you choose to have for yourself. And even if you use Pascal's wager to make a claim about God, did that really change your belief if you didn't use logic or reason to come to that conclusion? The next appeal to discuss is the appeal to emotion. The appeal to emotion fallacy occurs when a strong emotion is used to persuade rather than using an argument or logic. The appeal to emotion is very, very popular in presidential elections. I know I talk about those a lot in terms of logical fallacies, but they are just a great place where you can find these. So they are used a lot. We have a lot of presidential candidates who try to put forward agendas, but really they don't spend a lot of time focused on their agenda. They spend a lot of time on slogans and moments where they can elicit emotion that is evocative and compels their support base.
And let us choose joy.
Will make America great again.
So let's be stronger together, my fellow Americans.
From sea to shining sea, yes, we can.
The human spirit is really invigorated by emotion. We are driven by emotion far more than we are driven by logic and reason. The media and those individuals who like to advertise to us or get us to buy things or do things really understand this, and they use emotion a lot more than they use logic and reason. And it's just important for us to recognize that, to be self-aware, so that we can make the right decisions in our lives by being self-aware, coherent, and rational. This doesn't mean that you can't be emotional or you can't enjoy emotions or use emotions to live a rewarding life. But you do have to know when they're being used to manipulate you or to compel you to do something that really is not in your best interest. The next logical fallacy to address is the appeal to common practice. The appeal to common practice fallacy occurs when an action or belief is justified simply because it is widely done or it has been done for a long time. In the modern world, we know that female circumcision, what we often refer to as female genital mutilation, is wrong, harmful, and barbaric. But we haven't applied the same conclusion to male circumcision. Why is that? A big reason that is the case is because of culture and common practice. In the Western world, there is a large history of male circumcision that has been done for centuries, and it has been done commonly across a lot of cultures and across a number of religions. This has not been the case necessarily in the Western world as it relates to female circumcision, where it has mostly been done in non-Western countries in the past and largely not been adopted because it's frankly immoral. Medical communities have attempted, and still do, advocate for male circumcision by using the argument towards certain health outcomes, where there are some studies that show a reduced risk of urinary tract infections or a reduced risk of penile cancer. Many of these studies don't do a great job of trying to remove the confounding variables such as cleanliness habits and other risk factors. But even if there is a statistical significance to these health outcomes, is it really a justification? Would any improvement in a health outcome for female genital mutilation justify it? No, it wouldn't, because the ends don't justify the means. So why don't we apply that to male circumcision? The difference here is largely due to common practice. Even if there were statistically significant differences in these medical studies as it relates to urinary tract infection or penile cancer rates, does the ends really justify the means? If there were any improved health outcomes that would relate to female genital mutilation, would it be a justification? No, because the ends don't justify the means. So why does that even apply to male circumcision? The other thing to bear in mind is that we do have studies in male circumcision. We don't have them in females. Why? Because we know it's immoral, so we don't even do those studies. This is an example where a practice is done with an appeal to common belief. So I hope these were useful to you. These are different appeals that can relate to logical fallacies. I hope you like this as well as our overall series of logical fallacies. If you want to see my other videos, take a look at my channel. If you enjoy this information, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I thank you for your time.